Hi there, today I'm going to be walking through how we can use the Batch API provided by OpenAI to help us do bulk cleanup jobs in Marketo. So we all know how powerful AI can be when it comes to utilizing, enhancing, or cleaning up the data we have in Marketo. And we know we can use AI and in particular APIs provided by the likes of OpenAI to process our Marketo data as we move forward into the future. But the advent of AI in RevOps has only really started in 2023. So what do we do with all the records we have in our Marketo instance who existed before the advent of AI? What do we want to do, or what do we do if we want to bulk process all these people with some sort of AI operation in order to change the data on a lot of records at once? This is where the OpenAI Batch API comes into play because it was designed to process large numbers of requests at once, and it's perfect for updating a large number of records in our Marketo database. So this blog post will walk you through how we can bulk format phone numbers in our Marketo instance and convert them to E164 format. And I'll share Python code with you guys, which will help you transform your data that you export from Marketo into the required JSONL format required by OpenAI. I'll show you how to upload it to OpenAI with the instructions on how it should process your data, then how you can download the process data once the batch job is complete, and then finally how you can upload the process data into Marketo. So as you can probably guess, there will be a lot of Python code shown in this blog post, and I don't want you to be intimidated by that because I believe with the advent of AI, anyone should be able to write, run, and debug code using an LLM as their coding partner. And this is the premise for my Python for RevOps crash course. So if you're new to programming, you want to get a head start, and you want to get the most value from the Python scripts I share later on in this blog post, then you can pre-register for the Python for RevOps crash course, which I'll hopefully be launching later this year. Okay, so now you know what this blog post is all about. You might be interested in knowing why you should use OpenAI's Batch API versus their regular synchronous API. And the main advantage is that it offers a 50% cost reduction. And this can be significant if you want to process hundreds of thousands or even millions of records from your Marketo instance. This 50% cost reduction could be very significant. And if we open up the docs here, another nice feature of the Batch API, if we scroll down to the rate limits section here, we'll come back to this section a little bit later on to talk about this 50K request limit per batch. But you'll notice here they say using the Batch API does not consume tokens from your standard per model rate limits. So what this means is when you use the Batch API, it doesn't affect the usage associated with your synchronous API. It doesn't affect those rate limits at all. So in essence, it's a completely separate mechanism which you can use to get more throughput from OpenAI. So if you're running into rate limits with the synchronous API and you can't submit any more requests to OpenAI to process your data, then you can use the Batch API as an additional resource to get some extra processing from OpenAI. So when you're using the Batch API, the main idea here is that instead of looping through each row of the CSV that you export from Marketo, you will instead create a JSON object. Instead of looping through each row of your CSV that you export from Marketo and calling the synchronous API to make a request for each row, you will instead create a JSON object from each row of the CSV file. And this object will contain the system prompt and user message. Then we're going to store all these JSON objects in a JSON lines file, a JSONL file. And then we're going to create a batch job from this JSONL file. And then OpenAI is going to process each line or each request in that JSONL file to give us the desired result. And then we're going to download the output file containing the result for each line. The one downside to using the Batch API is that there's a 24-hour completion window, and there's no way for us to change this, or there's no way for us to speed up the completion of this Batch API job. So if you need results quickly, then the best approach is to use the synchronous API and loop through each row of your CSV and make a request to OpenAI for each row. Okay, so now we know the advantages of why you'd want to use the bulk API or the batch API. The next step is, what is E164 format and why should you care? So E164 format is a particular standard for phone numbers, and it starts with a plus symbol, then the international country code. So in this case, it's 1 for the United States and Canada. And then we've got like a local area code here. And then we've got the remainder of the number. And the important thing is that this number format does not contain any extra characters, or it does not contain any non-digit characters. So there's no hyphens in here, there's no brackets. It's just digits and this plus symbol. So that's what denotes the E164 format. And why this is important is that telecoms APIs offered by the likes of Telnex and Twilio require that your numbers be in this E164 format if you want to send SMS messages to these numbers, or if you want to do a number lookup on these numbers. And if you want some examples of how you can use E164 formatted phone numbers to send SMS in Marketo, then you can take a look at these blog posts here to see why you should use Telnex for your SMS in Marketo, how you can send SMS using webhooks, how you can do conversational SMS or two-way SMS from Marketo using Zapier as a middleman, and then how you can send SMS reminders for your webinars. And aside from sending SMS, when you have your numbers in this E164 format, it allows you to use number lookup APIs. And these APIs will tell you if a phone number is valid, and it can also tell you information such as the geography, like geographic information, like what country or what area the phone number comes from, what city, etc. It'll tell you if it's like mobile versus landline, and it'll also give you information about the carrier. And if you want more information on how you can integrate number lookup into your Marketo instance using a webhook, then you can take a look at this post here. And then aside from using telecoms APIs, I think as RevOps professionals, we can all agree it's good to have consistent formatting and data integrity across your Marketo instance. So if people are entering phone numbers, some are entering it with brackets, others are entering them with hyphens, it's just not good from a data integrity perspective. And for your sales team, if they're trying to call these phone numbers and there's no international country extension already added to the start of the phone number, they have to look up what country the person is in and then find the country extension for that country before they can phone the person. So it's a lot easier for your sales team if you already have the phone numbers in this format so they can just dial them right away. And then you could also prioritize leads for your sales team. So for example, you might want to prioritize leads if you know their phone number is a mobile number versus a landline, because you might be more likely to get through to them if you've got their mobile number versus some sort of landline where you have to enter an extension and kind of get routed through a like a voice AI bot to finally direct you to the right place. So that could be another way you prioritize leads for your sales team. But before we do this big cleanup, I want to first give you some advice of what you should do before doing the cleanup. So I recommend that you first fix your Marketo forms so that instead of having just one open text field where people can enter whatever they want for their phone number, I recommend breaking it into two, having a international country pick list, which will add the country extension to the start of the phone number, and then having a I call it like the phone number base field, which contains the remainder of the phone number. So this is what it looks like in the Marketo backend here, where you've got the country extension field, which is a pick list field, and then you've just got an open text field for the phone number base. And then what you do is you ask your front end team is that whenever anyone submits this form, these two fields, the country extension and the phone number base, get concatenated together and they get submitted into the hidden phone field. And it's this field which you'll use when you want to send your SMS messages or if you want to look up phone number information. And then you also need to ask them to implement a validation rule on this phone number base field here, so that if anyone enters any non-digit characters like hyphens or brackets, that it will prevent them from submitting the form and show an error message like this. Or an alternative approach is you can let people submit phone numbers any way they want with this open text field, but then you can clean up the phone number base field after submission by stripping out any non-digit characters. But my preferred method is the first one, where you show a warning message like this and you don't let them submit the form until they clean up the phone number themselves. So I recommend editing your Marketo forms to adhere to these guidelines so that you know moving forward in the future, any phone number that comes into your Marketo instance is already in E164 format and it's ready for you to start sending SMS to or to use a phone number lookup API. Now we need to consider all the historic records in our Marketo instance who have phone numbers that are not in the E164 format. So the first thing we need to do is identify all of these phone numbers. So if you haven't put any rules like this in place before, then it's likely that the only smart list condition you will need is phone number is not empty, because every phone number that existed in your instance will likely not have been in E164 format. But if you want to start with a smaller, narrower list, then you can also add conditions like the phone number does not start with the plus symbol, or the phone number contains like a bracket or contains a hyphen. You can use these to start with a narrower list of phone numbers, which you can maybe experiment with first, make sure it's working, and then you can broaden the scope later on to get more phone numbers to clean up. And then in order to get OpenAI to get the E164 format for our phone numbers, we're going to need to export 4 fields from Marketo: the ID, the email, the phone number, and the country. And I'll show you why we need the email later on. It's basically because if we want to import the E164 cleaned up phone numbers back into Marketo, we need to associate these with an email address in the list import. So that's why we need to export the email here. And we'll export that CSV from Marketo, but OpenAI does not accept the CSV format. It wants you to give it the data in a JSON lines format. And you can use this CSV to JSONL script in order to take the CSV that you've exported from Marketo and convert it to JSON lines format. And if you want to see what this script is doing or get like a visual overview of what the script is doing, this is what the data looks like when we export it from Marketo. And then the script's job is to take this data from Marketo, form the user message, which is basically just putting the phone number and the country into the user message, along with the system prompt. And this system prompt is going to be the exact same for each line in the JSONL file. And then it's just going to put it in JSON format. And then obviously each line here in column K is a JSON object. And this is what we will export to form the JSON lines file or JSONL file. This is basically what our script is doing. And if we go to the GitHub file here, what this does is it has a for loop to go through each row in the CSV file. And for each row, it's going to take the phone number and the country, and it's going to put it in the user message. So this is dynamic. It updates for each row. And then we've got the exact same system prompt for each row. This doesn't change. That is, it's static in each row. And then you'll also notice that in this custom ID field, we're joining the ID from Marketo and the email address together. And this will be so that later on, when we get the results file from OpenAI, it's easy for us to know using this custom ID field which Marketo person this result corresponds to. And you'll also notice here that we're constraining the result given by OpenAI for each line to 12 tokens. And the reason for this is because if we use the OpenAI tokenizer here, so if you open this up, the maximum length that an E164 number can be is 15 digits. And even if we ask OpenAI to preserve extensions, so if someone enters an extension in the phone number field, then we can ask OpenAI to add that to the end of the E164 number format. Even if we include that extension, we can still see that the longest possible number format uses like 9 tokens roughly. So I just gave us a bit of buffer there and I said, look, let's set the maximum number of tokens to be 12. And this will ensure that OpenAI will give us just the E164 phone number and nothing else. Because we prompted to do so here, we say you will only return the E164 formatted phone number. But just to give it an extra layer of protection and to ensure that it will really do that, we set the maximum number of tokens parameter here to constrain the maximum number of output tokens that it can use. So that's what this script's job is, but there are some important considerations to take into account when it comes to rate limits. So if you open up this link here, it will take you to the API limits for your account. And in there, you will see a table like this, which shows you for each model what your token limits are per minute. So TPM is tokens per minute, RPM is requests per minute, and then TPD is tokens per day. And this is what's important, is these batch queue limits and these tokens per day, because these are the maximum amount of tokens that you can have. This is a maximum number of tokens that you can process using the Batch API per day. So we need to take this constraint into account. And going back to the API docs, there's another constraint we also need to adhere to, and that is each batch file must contain less than 50,000 requests, or 50,000 lines in essence. So this script takes both of those constraints into account. So in this case, I've set the max tokens per batch to be 90,000. The reason for this is if you've got a very new account and you haven't yet made a lot of API calls, then this token per day limit can be very low. It can be 90,000 tokens. But if you've had your OpenAI account for a while and you've made a lot of requests, then your tokens per day can be extremely high. So here, for example, we've got like 5 trillion tokens per day or something that we can use because this account has been established for a while. So the script takes the max tokens per day into account and the max requests per batch. And it just has logic to make sure that each batch it's creating, each JSONL file it's creating from the CSV you exported from Marketo is less or consumes less than this number of tokens, and the JSONL file will have less than 50,000 lines. That's what these criteria here check for while we're looping through all the rows of the CSV from Marketo. And if we exceed the number of tokens, or if we exceed 50,000 lines in the JSONL file, then it will create another JSONL file and start populating that one instead. So that's what this Python script does. And then the next part of this is once we have that JSONL file or JSONL files ready, the next part is we want to create a batch job using the OpenAI SDK. And we'll first need to obtain our OpenAI API key, which you can do using this link. We'll need it in all 3 of the following scripts. And then we'll open up this file here, which is just very simple. It uses the OpenAI library to reference the JSONL file we created in the previous step. And then all it does is submit that JSONL file for processing. And if you had to create multiple JSONL files because of the number of tokens in your Marketo CSV, or the number of requests or the number of records in your Marketo CSV, then you might have to call this script multiple times over successive days in order to adhere to the tokens per day limit or the requests per batch limit. And then this is what an example response from creating the batch looks like. There'll be a file ID specified. So if you ever want to reference the JSONL file that you uploaded, it is now stored in the cloud in your OpenAI account. So you can reference this in other API requests using this ID. And then there's also a batch ID file, and this is what you will use to poll the batch status in the next step over here. And then this next script is very easy because using the OpenAI library, it's like only 4 lines of code basically. And we reference the batch ID here, which we got from the previous step. And we'll see that when we poll the batch and it's not yet completed, that is, it's still in progress, as we can see here in the status step, we can see the number of lines that have been completed out of the total. And we'll notice that the output file ID is still empty because it hasn't yet finished the batch job. But then if we look at the response when the batch has been completed, we can see the status is completed, and we can see the completed number equals the total number, and the output file ID is now populated. So this is the file ID that we're going to use in the next step to extract the process results from OpenAI. And it's this script that we'll use to do it. So we're going to reference the output file ID we just obtained from the previous step. And then the job of this script is for each row in the JSON lines file, we're going to loop through it, and we're going to get the ID and email from the custom ID object. So to give you a reminder of what that JSON lines file looks like. So when we first, so let's just look at this line here. So the first part of this script is we're going to reference the file ID, and then we save the raw output from OpenAI in a JSON lines file here. And what this looks like is this here. So we basically have the custom ID for everyone, which, if you remember, is the Marketo ID with a pipe and then the person's email. And then if we scroll along, we can see the content parameter here, which is what we're interested in, which is the E164 formatted phone number. So this is basically what the raw JSON lines output looks like from OpenAI. And if we want to see that in PyCharm, where maybe it's a bit cleaner, if you want to open up a JSON lines file, by the way, any IDE or integrated development environment like Visual Studio's, PyCharm, etc., they'll be able to open up JSON lines files. So we can see the custom ID parameter here. And then if we scroll to the right, we can see the content parameter, which contains the E164 formatted phone number. And then we can see the number of completion tokens used, the number of tokens used in the prompt, and then the total number of tokens used. And we can use this for estimating how much each request cost us and how much the batch overall cost us. So going back to the code here, we can see that this line here is basically extracting the ID and the email from this custom ID object. It's extracting the ID and the email. And then the content parameter, as I showed you before, contains the phone number that we're interested in. And then we also extract the prompt tokens and the completion tokens from each line, as well as the total number of tokens used. And then we estimate the cost that each line cost us to process. And we get this information here from the OpenAI pricing page. So these were the costs for, what model do we use? So when we create the batch, that's when we specify what model. No, sorry, which one it is, CSV to JSONL here. This is where we specify which model we want to use when we're creating the JSONL file. So we specified ChatGPT 4.0 is the model we want to use. So this get batch, the pricing it indicates here was for the 4.0 model. So obviously if you use a different model, you'll need to update these numbers here so that you can calculate the cost per request for that model. And then we store the total cost based on these calculations here in the total cost column. And then this is what we export to the output CSV. And what this looks like is the script takes this raw JSON lines output from OpenAI, and it basically converts it to this nice, easily readable CSV format where we have the person's ID and email extracted. We have the cleaned up E164 form. We have the cleaned up E164 phone number. Then we have the input tokens used, output tokens, and then the total cost. And if we want to get the cost for the entire batch, we obviously just sum these all together, and we can see that in the right hand side here, it's very, very cheap to do it for 10 people, obviously, but if you have millions of records, the cost is going to be significant. And if you want to compare, so we've got our Marketo data here, we can kind of pull this into the comparison sheet here. And then if we want to look up the E164 phone number that OpenAI gave us for this input phone number, then we can just use a VLOOKUP formula to look up this ID in this sheet and return the E164 phone number for that ID. So using the VLOOKUP, we get the E164 phone number for each ID, and then we can just do a comparison here to see if they make sense, which in this case it does. It looks like it's working as we intended. So here it took this phone number, removed the spaces, it added the plus symbol for the United Kingdom. Here it stripped out the brackets and just gave us the E164 phone number without the brackets. So it looks like it's working as we want. And then the final part of this is just isolating the email address column and the E164 phone number column. Or you can also do it from this tab. Just take these two columns. And then these will be what you download and then later on import into your Marketo instance so that you can change the phone numbers in your Marketo instance to be these new E164 phone numbers. And that's it. Now we've done all the hard work to update our Marketo form. So each incoming number is an E164 format. And we've also cleaned up our historic database and all the old phone numbers using the OpenAI Batch API. We can now start to enjoy the fruits of our labor and start sending SMS notifications or SMS marketing messages to your Marketo database. And we can also start to look up information about all these phone numbers. We can validate them. We can look up the geographic information about them. And we can also enhance our lead scoring, as I talk about in this blog post. And if you want some examples of how you can start incorporating SMS into your Marketo instance, then you can check out these blog posts here. So I hope you enjoyed this blog post and that you found it useful. Please like the video if you found it valuable, and then please comment as well. These things kind of give my videos, they make them look good to the YouTube algorithm and helps me promote them to others. And if you're enjoying this content and you want to see more like it, then subscribe. Thank you. Have a great day.